Sairam and welcome to the next session in computational linear algebra. We have a small introduction to determinants. We have the idea of the three key properties from where we derived multiple properties. Then we looked at how to get the big formula for determinants using cofactors, and now we are here to find out what are the different applications that we can derive from a determinant of a matrix. And we are going to end this session with what actually determinant is signifying, what in geometry does it really convey, and that will give us the big picture. Let us begin this session with a prayer. Om Sai Ishwaraya Vidmahe Satyadevaya Dhimahi Tanna Sarvah Prachodayat. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. So here is the first application of the determinant. We could actually find the inverse from using the technique that we found for the determinant. Okay, so what is the idea for finding the inverse? Let us look at the formula for finding the determinant. This is what we understood. We said that A11 times C11 plus A12 times C12, so on up to A1n times C1n. The C's here stand for the cofactors. So when we say C11, the cofactor of the matrix A, where we get that as the determinant of the submatrix when we remove the first row and first column from A. Similarly, with respect to every single cofactor, this is what we looked at in the previous session. Okay, now this gives us an idea to place this product in terms of rows and columns, so that something interesting is going to come out from here. Okay, so I am placing here A11, A12 up to A1n. This is my entire A matrix, but interestingly I pick up the cofactors C11, C12 up to C1n and place them in the first column of this matrix. We don't know what is this matrix, but then just a rough idea by just looking at this, let's see what's going to happen. Okay, now though we call it C11, C12, remember I am trying to put it here in the first column here. Okay, and what is interesting is I know that the first row times the first column here will definitely give me the determinant of A. That's what we have seen. Now we also said in the previous session that when it's not necessary that we have to find the determinant only using the first row, we could also do it using any ith row, right? So if we try and look at this second row here and look at the way I put the second column here, when I have A21, A22 up to A2n, I put the corresponding cofactor C21, C22 up to C2n, which means second row into second column will also give me determinant of A. Fantastic. Similarly, I am going to look at the nth row and the nth column. It will also give me the determinant of A. Okay, so this is what is the fact that we have that row I dot product with the column I will definitely give me determinant of that matrix A. But what is going to happen when we look at the first row here and the second column, or the second row here and the first column, right? So on and so forth. What are the values we are going to obtain? So we are interested in knowing what is going to be the dot product between ith row and the jth column, ith row of this A matrix and the new matrix in this the jth column, right? So let's try and take a look at that. So I have a sample here where I am trying to take the first row. Look at this A11, A12 up to A1n, first row of the A matrix, and the second column of the C of the second matrix here. Okay, so this is C21. Look at this C21, C22 up to C2n, C21, C22 up to C2n, right? Which means that we are trying to take the dot product between first row and second column of this matrix. Okay, what do we know? We know that C21 is a cofactor and it is equal to the determinant of M21. M21 is the submatrix that we obtain after removing second row and first column from A. Similarly, C22 is again a cofactor, is determinant of M22, and we obtain M22 after removing row 2 and column 2 of A. Okay, similarly we go on till C2n. We know this is a cofactor, determinant of M2n submatrix, where we are removing row 2 and column n of A. Okay, so look at this very important piece here. Every time, in order to find the cofactors, we really don't need the second row of the matrix A. Therefore, that gives us an idea. why don't we leave that row blank for a period of time, and then we will see what to fill in there, because it looks like for finding the cofactors I really don't need my entire row 2 at all, because row 2 I can actually put these numbers there, right? That gives us an idea. So let's take a look at this. I'm going to take B to be another matrix same as A. Remember, B is same as A matrix, except that row 2 has got removed. Okay, there is a blank in B matrix, row 2 is not there. What is important for us to observe is the cofactors C21, 22 up to 2n are exactly same for B as we do for A. There can't be a change. Why? Because all the elements are same from A. A and B have the same elements except for row 2, and therefore look at the cofactors indices here, C21, C22, etc. All these cofactors will be exactly same as the cofactors of A with respect to these indices. Okay. Now that gives us, looking at this formula, why don't we try and put A11, A12 up to A1n in the second row where there is a vacancy for B? Then what would happen? If I replace the second row by the first row of A, the determinant of B can be obtained like this, right? So this is same as the determinant of B. This formula that we wrote above is now turning out to be the determinant of a new matrix called B, where I have placed these elements A11, A12 and up to A1n in the second row of B. Okay, what does that tell us? It tells us that B has got two equal rows. How did that happen? The first row of B will naturally come from A, which is A11, A12 up to A1n. And what did we just do? The second row that has got a vacancy here, we are replacing it with the first row of A, which is A11, A12 up to A1n. That tells us that the first and second rows are equal, right? This is what we said. We said we're going to replace these numbers in the second row of B. Therefore, B has got two equal rows. And what does that convey? The determinant of B is going to 0. Okay. What does that tell us? It tells us that if I pick up the first row on the second column, it goes to 0. Similar argument can be understood for first row on any other column or any other row and a column which is not same as the row number, which means row I times the column j is going to give me simply 0. That is very interesting, and that means that probably we are going to get a diagonal matrix here. Let's take a look at what kind of diagonal matrix we get. So look at this matrix after multiplication. Very interestingly, all the elements have gone to 0 except for the diagonal elements. The diagonal is coming out to be clearly determinant of A across. That is nothing but determinant of A times identity, and therefore we got the inverse. Okay, how do I get the inverse? I just have to divide this matrix by determinant of A and I have my inverse, right? And look at this here, A times some matrix, I have written it as C transpose. So now we define this matrix to be our C matrix, or what is called as the cofactor matrix. Okay, but in these positions, right, not in these positions, the cofactor matrix is going to have natural positions. Therefore, this specific matrix which we are using for multiplication here, we are actually using the transpose of the cofactor matrix. So let me just keep a note of that. That's we are using here the cofactor matrix, its transpose. Right, so therefore I call this a C transpose, and we know that this is giving us determinant of A times identity, which means that it tells us that C transpose by determinant of A has got to be the A inverse. And the immediate side effect of this is we can clearly see that A inverse will exist only when determinant of A is not equal to 0. That's obvious from looking at this relation, right? So this is what we said, that the C is called as the cofactor matrix, and it is having the proper indices in their positions, not the other way, whereas C transpose would be the transpose of this matrix. Let's take a simple example. 2 by 2, I have A, B, C and D. I want to calculate the cofactors C11. Let me give you 1 or 2 examples here. C11 is going to be minus 1 power I plus j, so 1 plus 1, determinant of the submatrix M M11. What is M11? Remove first row and first column. I'm left with D. That is my matrix. It's a 1 by 1 matrix, and therefore the determinant is D itself. So my answer is minus 1 whole square, which is 1 times D. Therefore it is D. Right? Similarly, we can look at the other values here, and we will be able to appreciate. We got the cofactors now. C11 is D, 21 is minus B, 12 is minus C, and 22 is A. We have to now find the inverse. For the inverse, I need to look at the cofactor matrix transpose. That's very important. Okay, so let's take a look at the C transpose here. Look at the way we are writing here. This is C11 and C12 supposedly to come in the row of the C matrix, but we have put that in the column here, right? So Dn minus C and minus B and A in a column here. So that's C transpose. And what is our determinant? The determinant is AD minus BC. We know that we have already computed that. Okay, and therefore we have the inverse now for my A matrix. Right? It will be interesting to actually multiply this and check and satisfy ourselves to find that it is indeed the inverse, right? The C transpose by the determinant is indeed the inverse, and we are able to see that this is going to produce the identity. Okay, we pick up a 3 by 3 example. So we look at the 3 by 3 example. So in order to find the inverse, first I need to find the determinant. Of course, we can find the determinant using the first row, but remember that we can be a little more smart by trying and find the determinant using the first column, right? Because I have two 0 elements here. So this is the idea. I'm going to use the cofactors of column 1, and therefore I'm going to say determinant of A is going to be A11 times this cofactor of C11, A21, right? Not A12, but A21 times C21 and A31 times C31. We know that these two will go to 0. I just have one cofactor to be computed here. This is A11 1. Okay, find the determinant of this submatrix after removing first row and first column. So that is a 2 into minus 3 minus 6 minus 2. That's a minus 8, and therefore my determinant is minus 8. So this was probably much quicker to compute rather than using the first row here. Right. So this is a benefit of understanding that determinant of A is same as determinant of A transpose. Okay. But then that doesn't end the story there. In order to find the inverse, we need to find all the cofactors, and therefore we need to find out what is C11, C12, C13. So I have figured out all the numbers here. Maybe I'll just take one sample and try to show you. Let's look at C23. So this is going to be minus 1 power 2 plus 3, and the cofactor, which is the determinant of the submatrix M23, and M23 is obtained after removing the second row and third column from A. Let's look at that. So let's remove second row and third column. That gives us 1301. Let's check this here. Yes, so that's indeed 1301, and the determinant of that is 1 minus 0, and therefore that's 1. This is a minus 1, therefore there will be a minus 1 here. Right. So similarly, we please verify all the cofactors and place them carefully in C transpose. So look at this here, minus 8, 0 and 0, they come in a column here. 8, minus 3 and minus 1 in a column and in a column. Therefore that's my C transpose, and please do verify that C transpose by the determinant is really the inverse, right? Try and multiply this with A and then check whether we are getting the identity matrix or not. So here is a very simple idea of finding the inverse just from using the same ideas that we looked at for finding the determinant. So let us move to the second application. This is another interesting formula that we would have learnt earlier called Cramer's rule. Cramer's rule is very helpful in finding the x in the Ax equal to B, right? We would have done this using traditional elimination techniques, but then there is also another formula where we can use Cramer's rule and then find the x directly instead of doing elimination. Okay, so let's figure out how we are able to find out Cramer's rule, and what does that rule really say. Okay, we know that if A inverse exists, x has got to be A inverse times B, and just previous application tells us A inverse is nothing but C transpose divided by determinant of A. Okay, fine. The interesting part is going to be to look at C transpose B for a specific value or a component of the x. Let's look at the xj component here and try and see what will we get from C transpose B for the jth component of my solution x. Okay, that is going to be the jth row of C transpose times the B vector. I know B vector is going to be simply B1, B2 up to Bn. Okay, look at the jth row of C transpose, that has got to be same as the jth column of C. And how will the jth column of C look like? Look at this here, it will be C1j, C2j, so on up to Cnj. right? So this is the transpose, and therefore these are the exact cofactors that are coming from the jth column of my cofactor matrix. So this is the entire summation, and we need to divide that by determinant of A. Okay. Now, moment we look at this, this definitely gives us the idea, as we looked in the previous application, that the cofactors here are obviously the same with respect to A, isn't it? Because C1j, C2j, they are exactly the same, except that if I want to figure out C1j, I remove first row and jth column. Here I remove second row and jth column, and that gives us an idea that we can replace the jth column by these numbers b1, b2 to bn, and we could come up with a matrix like this. Look at this. I have simply copied the A matrix except for the jth column and replaced it with a b1 to bn. And if I try and look at this matrix's determinant using the jth column, try and see what will be the formula. The formula is going to be b1 times c1j, right? We have that here, plus b2 times c2j, we have it here, and so on up to bn times cnj, and we have it here, right? What does that tell us? That the formula that we have written here is nothing but the determinant of this new formed matrix, which we are going to call as bj. And what is bj? We copy A matrix except for the jth column, replace it by the B vector, and that is my capital Bj matrix. Okay, and since this is the determinant of Bj, what is my solution? Xj, that is nothing but determinant of Bj divided by determinant of A, right? That's it, we got it. And therefore it tells us that Cramer's rule, right? This is the famous Cramer's rule, and it tells us that if you want to find the solution directly, you really don't have to do elimination. All that you need to do is to find the determinant of Bj, where take the same matrix, replace the jth column by the B vector, find its determinant and divide it by the determinant of A. Fantastic. Right, so let's take a simple example and see if this really works. So here are two simple equations. I've written the coefficient matrix here, A and B is going to be 0, 6, the right hand side. Okay, so let's take a look at x1. This must be determinant of B1 divided by determinant of A. Determinant of A, I think we can calculate that one time, so it's coming out to be -2. Okay, take a look at what is Bj. Bj is removing the first column, replacing it with the B vector. So I removed the 1, 2 here, replaced with 0, 6, but 3, 4 remains as it is. I find out the determinant, I got the answer to be 9. Let's take a look at B, this is B1, so this is B2, right? Look at the determinant of B2 and how we obtain B2. Retain the first column, second column is replaced by the B vector, we have a 0, 6, and we calculate this, and this is my answer, right? So you can please verify in this equation and see if the solution really works or not. So this is quite interesting formula, and we might even question why did we really need elimination at all in the first place. Why don't we just simply go with Cramer's rule? It's a very huge disadvantage when we look at Cramer's rule, because when you want to find the solution for an n by n system, remember that we need to calculate n plus 1 determinants, right? And calculating the determinant is definitely not easy. It will need a lot of calculations, and therefore using Cramer's rule for finding solution is definitely not worthwhile. The best technique has been elimination, and I guess it's going to remain to be the best method. Elimination is the best strategy in order to find the solution for Ax equal to B. But then we also have this Cramer's rule and another formula, interesting formula, so I think we should be aware of this. Let's move to the next application. We're going to try and figure out a formula for the pivots, and the key observation for this is here. The first k pivots are completely determined by the submatrix AK, right? The first k pivots are completely determined only by the submatrix AK. What do I mean by AK? If you take a 3 by 3 matrix, then the upper left 2 by 2 is what I call as A2, right? So k upper rows and k left columns, and upper left corner of that matrix is what we call as a submatrix, in this sense of saying A1, A2, A3, etc. If A is 3 by 3, A3 is the entire matrix, A2 is going to be these in blue, and A1 is going to be simply the single element A, right? And that's the idea. So we talk about upper left corner matrices. Okay, let's take this 3 by 3 example and try and do elimination, and watch out for something really interesting. Okay, so let me first try and eliminate my C here. So I'll do my row operation. I get the 0 here. We got the rest of the values as well here. Okay, the first point to note here is that finding this element AD minus BC by A, it definitely depends only on the A2 matrix. For finding this out, probably we needed this value and nothing from here and nothing below, nothing from here as well, which means that all that we needed was this multiplier which came from here, and this element, which means that in order to calculate this part in the elimination, we really did not have to go through the other elements, right? Okay, but then let us just continue with elimination and see what happens. So let me try and eliminate the G now. Next, this is the 3 1 element. This is a row operation. I get the 0 here, other few expressions which are coming out here. Please do verify if these are right. Move to the last one. We want to eliminate the 3 2 element. It's a really large expression there, and finally this is the answer we get. You can see that this is a really large expression that comes out, right? So instead of using this in multiple places, I'm just going to use a star here to denote this expression. So let me show you that we have figured out the upper triangular matrix, and since we have the upper triangular matrix with us and the multipliers, we know that we can figure out the L. Okay, so look at the first multiplier here. I think we had a C by A, right? So look at this, is C by a G by A, and AH minus BG by AD minus BC. Those are the multipliers I kept here. So that's a mistake here. This can't be 0, sorry, that must be a 1. Okay, so this is my L matrix, and watch very carefully the way we have colored the upper left 2 by 2 here. That's very important. We're going to see a very interesting observation. Now that I have my U, this is my upper triangular matrix, we could simply divide the first row by A so that we can create ones on the pivots, and therefore you can see here this is going to be we are dividing this by A, we are dividing this by AD minus BC by A, and dividing this by this huge expression, and therefore I get my upper triangular to be 1 1. So I guess I should have written here, sorry, not a star, should have been a 1 here, sorry. Okay, and since I am dividing this by A, this will be a B by A and E by A. You can look at this here. Similarly here, this will go to 1. This one will be AF minus EC by AD minus BC, right? So that's what we have here, and the last one will become a 1. Okay, now since we have this, we can figure out the diagonal as well. So the diagonal has to be the inverse of this division, which means the multiplication, which is by A, AD minus BC by A, and this huge expression where I am replacing this by a star. Okay, and what we know definitely is L into D into U will give my original matrix A, and that I am denoting here as A3, standing for 3 by 3, is going to be L3 D3 U3. Okay, this we know from our earlier results. But what is very interesting is that try and take a look at the 2 by 2 upper left matrices in L, D and U. They will also produce the A2 or the upper left corner of A, which means we will definitely get A, B, C, D if we are taking out the upper left corners from L, D and U. Try and take a look at L2, D2 and U2. I have just written them down here. Please do a simple multiplication and check. I'm sure you will end up in getting A, B, C, D, right? What does that tell us? It tells us that if we do LU decomposition, then every single upper triangular, every single submatrix is also produced by their corresponding submatrices of L, D and U, right? So let's generalize this. This is how we're going to write it. We're going to say A, K, where K is the upper left part, kth upper left part of A, is going to be given by L, K, D, K and UK. Okay, so let's apply a determinant on both sides, and this is what we will get. We know that these two will go to 1 because their diagonals are all 1 and they are triangular. Determinant of dk is what is what left out, but we know that this determinant is nothing but the product of the first k pivots, right? We know that because we know that pivots will appear on the diagonal matrix in LDU decomposition. Therefore, that will be same as the product of the first k pivots. That's a very interesting formula we already struck. We said for finding determinant of AK is the product of the first k pivots. Let me assume that they are D1, D2 and D3 etc. So what will I have here? This is going to be D1, D2 up to Dk. A product of them will give me determinant of AK. Therefore, I can actually start looking at what is determinant of a k minus 1. That will be product from d1, d2 up to dk minus 1, isn't it? Right? So that's what we have here. And that gives us a very, very interesting formula to find out what is really dk, the kth pivot. So look at this. Determinant of the ak gives me the entire product till dk, whereas the determinant of the previous upper left matrix is only giving me the product up to the k minus 1th pivot. That gives me this formula that says if I have to find the kth pivot, all that I need to do is to take the determinant of the upper left k matrix from A and divide that by the upper left k minus 1 matrix. Right? So take a look at these two. Right? So this would cancel out everything, leaving dk alone. That's the kth pivot. We got it. Right? So that's the formula for finding pivots. Right? So let's take a simple example. I'm going to take the 3 by 3 matrix that we did before, use the same example, and we will try and see if it really does find the pivots or not. So this is the same matrix that we have on top. Let's take a look at what are the different matrices we're going to have here. Obviously, I'm going to have A3, I will have A2 and A1. Now, in order to look at the pivot formula, it says that if you want to find the first pivot, it's going to be determinant of A1 divided by determinant of A0. Now, what is determinant of A0? There is nothing called A0 here, right? But we're going to make an assumption that anytime determinant of A0 is going to be given by 1. Okay, given that assumption, let's figure out what is determinant of A1. It's going to be the determinant of this 1 by 1 matrix, which is 1 divided by 1, this one. Therefore, my answer will be 1. Okay. Similarly, my second pivot is going to be determinant of A2, right? This part 1, 3, 0, 2. That I'm going to divide by determinant of A1, which is 1. So I get 2 by 1, which is 2. The third pivot is going to be determinant of A3, the entire determinant, divided by the previous one, which we just obtained here, to be 2. So I get this to be minus 8 by 2 equal to minus 4. Right? So this tells me that the 3 pivots we have are 1, 2 and minus 4. Right? We could go back and check if that's really the case. You can even use elimination and verify whether we are getting 1, 2 and minus 4. Okay. Now there is also a simple way to verify this formula that we just obtained here. How are we saying that this formula is correct? Okay, the way we can look at it is that we know the determinant of the entire matrix is the product of its pivots, and we have a formula for the pivots, right? So why don't we multiply using all the pivots, use this formula and multiply and see what happens, right? So here is the way we can verify this. Determinant of A we know is the product of pivots, and we know that the product nth pivot is going to be determinant of an by determinant of an minus 1. The n minus 1th pivot is going to be determinant of an minus 1 by determinant of an minus 2, so on and so forth till the determinant of a1 by determinant of a naught. Okay, all these factors would get cancelled and we'll be left with determinant of an by determinant of a naught, and we know that this is our assumption to be 1. That's same as determinant of a, right? Which means that this formula is definitely working. And a very beautiful insight that this formula tells us is, when we try to look at elimination, or whenever we were doing LU decomposition, we were really not sure whether this matrix would involve a row exchange or not. Right? As we used to go through the elimination, we used to figure out it needs a row exchange, and then we will add a permutation matrix and say that PA is equal to LDU. But here is a simple formula that can tell us whether elimination would really need a row exchange even in future as we go ahead. Right? So here is the idea. Elimination can be completed without any row exchanges if the leading submatrices, what are the leading submatrices? Here they are, right? an minus 1, all this from say a0, a1 up to an, all these are called the leading submatrices. All the upper left matrices that we have seen till now are called the leading submatrices if they are all non-singular. The simplest way is to check the determinants. So we pick up, if we are given n by n, we have to check for the n minus 1 determinants, and we know for sure that it wouldn't have. If all of them are non-zeros, then all those leading submatrices are non-singular, and therefore that matrix we can do elimination on that without any row exchange. A very beautiful insight that comes from this third application of finding a formula for pivots using determinants. I guess we have looked at all the applications, and what's now important or left out is to understand that small piece which will give us the bigger picture about what determinants really are. what in geometry do they really mean, right? So let's take a look at that. What do determinants signify? That's the question. Here is the claim. The claim is that the determinant finds the area between the row vectors. I mean, this is a claim, right? So we don't have a proof at this point, but we'll definitely prove it. 1, 2 and 3, 4. So 1, 2 is one vector, 3, 4 is another vector. Determinant is claimed to find the area between the two vectors. Similarly, if I look at a 3 by 3 matrix, I have 3 vectors now. So how do I understand the determinant? The determinant is going to find, look at this is just the area, but now this is going to find the volume of the parallelepiped or parallelepiped, something like the box, right? So in a box, probably they are perpendicular to each other, but a parallelepiped, they may not be perpendicular to each other, okay, which is formed by the row vectors. So use the row vectors and form a parallelepiped, and look at the volume of that. That is same as the determinant of this matrix. That's the claim. What we'll do is we'll try and prove this using a very simple case, and we will also be able to appreciate the geometry behind this. So let me take a very simple example of picking up orthogonal vectors. So let me pick up v1 to vn to be orthogonal vectors, and I am placing them in the rows of A. Okay, look at A times A transpose. A times A transpose will give me all the non-diagonal elements will go to 0 because all these are orthogonal to each other, and the diagonals are going to become magnitude squares, right? So this we know from the idea of orthogonal vectors. Let's apply a determinant on this. We know that this is going to be determinant of A times A transpose will be same as determinant of A times determinant of A transpose. We know the determinant of A transpose same as determinant of A, so this becomes determinant of A whole square. Take a look at the determinant of this matrix. Obviously this is going to be the product of the diagonal elements here, and that's what we have. So determinant of A square is this, therefore determinant of A is going to be plus or minus the product of the magnitudes of every single row vector. What does that tell us? The product of the magnitudes of every single row vector is nothing but the volume of that diagram that is formed, right? I don't want to use say box, or I don't know how to call it in the nth dimension. Should I say the nth dimension parallelepiped that is formed by the row vectors of A? Of course, we still see there is a plus or minus, and what does that signify? In fact, the plus and minus signify whether it's a right-handed coordinate system or a left-handed coordinate system. But discussing about that will be out of the purview of linear algebra. Maybe we'll have to get into physics, vectors and vector algebra, etc., where we don't want to at this point, and therefore I'm not going to discuss too much about the sign of it. But the idea is that physically it is signifying to figure out the volume of the n-dimensional box that gets formed using the row vectors of A, right? So that's the idea. Okay, now we'll try and take a look at what does it mean geometrically as well. So let me pick up a very simple example. I have picked up an example where I'm saying I have picked up wantedly orthogonal vectors, right? 2, 3 and 3 minus 2, the row vectors are orthogonal to each other. How do I know? Take the dot product, 2 into 3 6, 3 into minus 2 minus 6, that goes to 0. So these two are orthogonal to each other. So let's take a look at the diagram. I have 2, 3 and 3 minus 2. What we'll do is let us construct, since they are perpendicular, we know that we're just going to construct in this case probably a square. It could become a rectangle as well, but then the example we picked up, we know that the magnitudes of these two are the same, and therefore it's going to be a square. Okay, let's calculate the square area. That's going to be side into side, and each one is root 13, so my area is 13. Take a look at the determinant. This is a minus 4 minus 9, that's minus 13. We said we are finding the area. Yes, it's true, it's working. Oh, interesting. But does this work only for vectors that are perpendicular and orthogonal? Does it really work for any other vectors? Yeah, so that's the next idea. Let's take a look at vectors that are not orthogonal, right? So 2, 3 and 1 minus 2, they're definitely not orthogonal. Okay, let's see what kind of a diagram that does this really produce. What is this claim of finding the area? So this is my 2, 3, here is my 1 and minus 2, right? Importantly, they are not column vectors. Look at the row vectors, right? 2, 3 and 1 and minus 2. So I'm just extending parallelly on the other sides, and I get a parallelogram, right? Basically we have to figure out what is the area of this parallelogram. and we know the area of the parallelogram is not the product of the sides. No, that's not the area of the parallelogram. Area of the parallelogram is the base into height. So if I keep R1 as the base, I want to figure out what is the perpendicular distance from R1. If I am able to find the perpendicular distance from R1 using using the R2 vector, definitely, but then the point is not its magnitude. We want to find the perpendicular distance. How much is R2 pulling R1 away, in a sense of trying to form some kind of a rectangle like this, right? So that's the idea. Or in a sense, can we say, let me project R2 onto R1, and thereby also we will be able to produce that rectangle, right? And therefore that is an interesting idea, because we know projections. We can use the idea of projections and try to figure out what is that new rectangle that's going to form. Let's take a look at the diagram. So look at this interesting diagram. This is the same two vectors, but the way we are looking at is, I'm taking R2 and projecting it on R1. Yeah, it's falling on the other side. So if we use our idea of dot product, it's very clear that the dot product of R1 and R2 is going to be negative. Is that really the case? Let's check. Right, so take dot product of 2, 3 and 1 minus 2. Yes, that's indeed negative. Okay, so that also is physically verified in geometry here. Okay, now when I project this is my projection vector. That's it. And it's a small projection vector. We know that it will lie in the direction of R1 or in its opposite direction. So in this case, it's lying in the opposite direction. Okay, now look at the perpendicular, the way we projected. I wantedly put the arrow in this direction because it keeps my calculations quite simple. Okay, so R2 is projected onto R1, gives me the shadow P, and the height, which is the perpendicular distance, the projection, is going to be given by, let's take a look at, if I walk P and then H, I would reach R2, right? Which means what should be my H? It must be R2 minus P. So if I do P plus R2 minus P, I am reaching effectively R2 by basic law of vector addition. Okay, so I got my H. What's my base? My base is going to be the standard R1, because this is the height and this is going to be my R1. But you may look at this and you say, now how is that this is going extra here, right? So take a look at this carefully. I had a parallelogram like this. So we have a triangle here, and this much triangle has got cut off from the other side, which means that we are effectively looking at the area of this rectangle, which is exactly same as the area of this parallelogram. This is exactly same as the area of this parallelogram. Now our life is simple. Instead of calculating the area of the parallelogram, we could calculate the area of this rectangle. Now what's the area of the rectangle? This is the base, that's the height. Okay, I have my height. What's the base? The base has got to be R1, right? So this much which is lost here is got added here. This must be R1. That's it. So what it says is that if these two areas are the same, the area of this rectangle and the area of this parallelogram, then we are also claiming that if I have two rows in A, the determinant of that matrix must be same as keeping the base same and putting the height here. And what's the height? We said height is R2 minus P, right? Just from here. Okay, let's really apply this on this example and work out and see if this is really true or not. Okay, let's use our formula for projection. Do you remember what is the formula for projection? For projecting B onto A, we had the dot product of A times B, or A into B, A dot B, by the modulus, by the magnitude of A square. Entire thing will give me that ratio times the A vector, which means that it will lie on R1 itself. Okay, that's my projection vector. Let's take a look at what's the projection vector we get for this example. We are projecting the row 2 on R1, right? Look at the matrix. It is 2, 3 and 1 minus 2. 1 minus 2 is projected onto 2, 3. That's the idea. So here is what we have. When I do that, I get 4 minus 4 by 13 times this vector 2, 3, which is definitely in this direction of R1 or in its opposite direction, right? Okay. R2 minus P is what we want, because we want to replace the second row by that to find the determinant. R2 minus P, I'm going to get, this is my R2 minus this, I get this to be this final result. Let me place these two in the row 1 and 2 and find the determinant, and also figure out what's the determinant of my original matrix and check whether that's the same or not, and really see whether that's same as the area here, right? So so many things to verify. But before that, a very interesting fact is, do we understand that this height vector is perpendicular to R1, right? Look at this, the projection and the height, this is definitely perpendicular to R1. and I hope that this sounds or rings a bell about something that we did recently in orthogonalization, where we try to look at what's called as the Gram-Schmidt process, where we said if we are given R1 and R2, the Gram-Schmidt process will actually bring us orthogonal vectors, and there is something interesting that the Gram-Schmidt is really producing. So let's continue this example and see what are the other insights as well from here. Okay, so let me figure out what's the determinant of A. My original determinant is -7. I am replacing keeping R1, replacing the second row by the height, which is what we obtained here. I replaced it here. Very interestingly, when I calculate the determinant, indeed it is -7. Let's take a look at the area of this rectangle. The area of this rectangle is going to be this magnitude and magnitude of R. Please calculate that for yourself, and you're sure to find that that's going to be 7 again, right? And therefore it's pretty clear that determinant of A is the area of the parallelogram formed by the row vectors of A, and we can extend this to nth dimension as well and say that this is determinant is going to give us the n dimensional volume of the n dimensional parallelopiped formed by the n different rows of the matrix A. And here is that other insight that I was mentioning a few seconds back. We talked about Gram-Schmidt. Gram-Schmidt orthogonalization is producing orthogonal vectors that we know, but the interesting fact is that the volume or the area or whatever we say is going to be the same. How do we know that's the same? Because orthogonalization typically did this process, and we find that the determinant of that is the same as my original matrix. So using Gram-Schmidt orthogonalization, when we obtain the matrix Q from A, it's a very important fact to go back and then verify. We are going to get the determinants of them to be the same because the volumes of those diagrams will happen to be the same, right? So that's the power of Gram-Schmidt orthogonalization, and now this is the power of understanding determinants on what do they really mean in geometry. I hope that this session gave us a complete picture about determinants, and we will try to move on to another topic from the next session. Let's close this session with a prayer. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti.